Every business, regardless of its size, must provide its employees with safe working conditions. And considering the range of potential hazards, from asbestos to slippery stairs to excessive noise, that can be difficult for a small business. And why should everyone be so concerned about job safety and health? Because each year, approximately 6,000 employees in this country die from workplace injuries, while another 50,000 die from illnesses caused by exposure to workplace hazards. In addition, 6 million workers suffer non-fatal workplace injuries at an annual cost to U.S. businesses of more than $125 billion. Standards and rules for safe working conditions, tools, equipment, facilities, and processes are set by the Labor Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. OSHA standards apply to every private employer with one or more employees, except for those in industries covered by other federal job safety legislation. Today, roughly 93 million employees across the country are protected by state and federal OSHA programs. But even with adequate safety measures, accidents do happen. In this insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Mark Hasted's story, we visit with Bob Genis, founder of Sonin Genis Law Firm, to learn how he successfully represented his client and his client's family in a construction accident that resulted in a record settlement of $3.5 million. Bob has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in New York. He's built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from New York. It is my great pleasure to introduce Bob Genis to the show. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm. What type of law does your law firm practice?
Our firm practices Sonin and Genis. Our office is in the Bronx, but we've tried cases in 7 states. We do plaintiffs' personal injury medical malpractice. We represent the families of people that have been killed or seriously injured by the negligence of others. We've been doing this since 1988. I've been doing it since 1983, and we're considered a pretty good firm. We work real hard.
Now, in your spare time, I understand you're active within New York State Bar, right? You teach classes. Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Sure. I teach a lot, mainly with the New York State Trial Lawyers Institute, New York State Trial Lawyers Association, where I'm an emeritus director. I've been their director for over 21 years. I'm in charge of the New York State Trial Lawyers Institute program on evidence. It's called Evidence to Win. We do that all over New York State. I also co-chair Depositions to Win. I teach a lot of different classes for them and many other different bar associations throughout the state and the country. I've taught on a national level for AAJ, American Association for Justice. I've taught at the Masters in Atlanta with Don Keenan. I've taught all over the country.
Right, and lawyers really need to go to some of these seminars, if you will, in continuing education, because you don't learn this in law school, do you?
Absolutely. You don't learn any of these skills in law school about how to try a case, and that's what we like to teach, and the law of how to try a case.
We're looking at another case that you successfully resolved, the Mark Hastedt case, who was involved in a construction accident. Tell our audience a little bit about this case, the facts.
Tragic case and a difficult case. Mark Hastedt was a skilled construction worker, and he was at a construction site. This is upstate New York, and they're working on building a school, but they didn't have proper safety devices, and they didn't have proper scaffolding. And what happens is, because everything was unsafe, he fell off of a scaffold, and he became a quadriplegic, I should say, and then subsequently 7 months later died related to it. He developed a clot due to him being a quadriplegic, and then he died, leaving a wife and 2 children behind. The tough part of the case is he was unable to tell us what actually happened, and there was no eyewitness. So how could you prove what actually happened, what was done wrong?
So let me ask you this, because I've seen this with really severe construction cases. Oftentimes I land on their head. No witness around. They can't tell what happened, as you mentioned in this case, right? These are cases that require a Perry Mason lawyer, right? One that does investigation. So let's talk about what you discovered and how you had to go about it to get it.
Well, a bunch of things. First of all, in this case, OSHA did do an investigation. So we had the results that we did our Freedom from Information Act requests to OSHA, and then we had to take an appeal, but we got lots of really important photographs. We learned that OSHA actually issued violations related to what happened here, and that were a cause of it.
On other cases, on other incidents?
On this site, they did an investigation after he fell, and they determined that he fell from this scaffold and how he got injured. Now, there was a question as whether or not he fell from a scaffold or a ladder, or was he going from one onto the other? And that's where the ear witness proved crucial. Through our investigation, we learned of a coworker, and we did his deposition. We subpoenaed him, and we learned that the coworker was on the level 2 scaffold, while Mark was going up to the level 3 scaffold. And while he could not see Mark, he heard Mark walking on the wooden planks of the scaffold. And then he heard no steps. Then he heard a loud thud. He called up Mark, because he's no more steps above him, and he looks down, and Mark is below him. And we asked, well, how do you know he fell from the scaffold and not from the ladder? And he said, well, the wooden steps of a scaffold, when you step on the wooden planks of the scaffold, have a distinctive sound. The ladder was fiberglass, a completely different sound if one was on the ladder. So he was able to be our ear witness to prove that Mark fell from the scaffold and due to the defects in the scaffold, as opposed to the ladder that was properly attached.
Now let's talk about the workers, for example. I've run across cases where, for example, workers are paid cash. So therefore, for the day's work or whatever, so therefore, you can't find the workers. How did you find this worker? That's question one. And second of all, some workers are afraid to testify because they may be working for the same company. It puts their job in jeopardy. How do you get around all that?
It's a bigger problem in New York City, I think, when you have more undocumented workers that are getting paid in cash. This particular job was upstate New York, and it was a union job, so everybody was paid on the books, so that we were able to know who was there and who was on the job site. And yes, people are hesitant to speak against, especially, it's a tough economy and jobs are hard to come by, and you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. But fortunately, this particular worker told the truth. He stood up for Mark and his widow and their 2 children.
Yeah, isn't there a law in the state of New York that's called the scaffolding law?
We do have a scaffolding law, and it's Labor Law Section 240. But just because you have the law, you still have to prove that there was an unsafe scaffold, and that was a cause of him getting harmed.
Now, you mentioned OSHA had issued a report against this same contractor, this same developer, correct?
Yes.
For similar, and in this case, and maybe in some other cases too, correct?
Well, in this one, it was for this very case, and they found certain violations of OSHA regulations right in this case for this scaffold, all of which could have caused Mark to fall. That there was missing planks, things were piled too high, there were no tow guards, Mark was not wearing, most importantly, a lifeline, a retracting lifeline. So they had all of these OSHA violations.
You mentioned under your Freedom of Information Act. Why do you have to file a Freedom of Information Act if OSHA is a public entity, right? Funded by the taxpayers, correct? Or the state, federal government, whatever. And why isn't this readily available? They file a report, you just go get it. Why do you have to file a report to get the information? And you mentioned an appeal, too. Was somebody trying to block that?
No, what happens is that is the mechanism for trying to get governmental investigations, is using the Freedom from Information law. So that's the mechanism the public has to get when the government investigates something.
You just can't request it.
Well, that is your request.
But how long does that take?
Depends. For example, if it's the city of New York, for whatever municipal entity within the city, they take a long time, even though they're not supposed to take a long time. So that's a separate issue. This was upstate New York and the federal government, and they were actually pretty decent about getting back to us, but they heavily, what's called redact things. They take out the names of witnesses, and from their point of view, they want witnesses to come forward, and if witnesses' names are revealed, they're afraid that the people will not come forward. So, but now, how do you find out who the witnesses are? So we had to take an appeal to get additional information. They still did not reveal the names of the witnesses, but they revealed enough that we could figure out who the witnesses were.
How did they reveal enough so you could figure out who they were?
Because then, during the course of discovery, you get the names of all of the workers for the different contractors, and you get the daily schedule, so you know who was doing what and where, and now you can piece it all together.
What was the end result of this case?
The end result was after there was motion practice for summary judgment and an appeal where the appellate court said question of fact for jury. We settled it. We got a complete what's called waiver of a workers' comp lien. They owed $1 million to workers' comp, but normally you have to pay that all back. Did not have to pay back a penny, plus $3.5 million cash up front, which upstate New York, that's a lot of money in a rural community. This was in Oneida County. So it was a value of about $4.5 million. And this way we were able to invest it, and that this poor widow and her children will hopefully, they don't have their husband, they don't have their father, and they don't have their family breadwinner and someone that they love. These were high school sweethearts that were together their whole lives. But at least they will have some measure of financial security.
Yeah, you kind of quickly went over, you got able to get a waiver of the workers' comp, right, of about $1 million. Let's focus on that. How did you do that? That's number one. And number two, usually you can't get waivers for that, correct?
It's very rare to get a complete waiver. You could usually get a reduction in the amount of lien, and the question is how much can you get it reduced? But a complete waiver is highly unusual.
How did you do it here?
We really spoke long and hard with the workers' comp carrier, and I actually had somebody who was a decent human being, which doesn't always happen. And we just talked about these children don't have a father. This woman who lost her high school sweetheart, they were together for many, many years. And she's never getting her husband back. And then from the financial perspective is, guys, you don't have to pay anymore, so you're saving money. And that perhaps, unfortunately, was the key factor to them, but that they didn't have to continue to making payments, that they were saving money is what did it in the end, perhaps. But they did the right thing. The comp carrier, I'll stand up for them here, they did the right thing and they waived it.
Now let's talk about, in the state of New York, especially in the city of New York, for example, there's a lot of construction accidents. There's always construction going on. And from every state that we've covered stories in dealing with construction accidents, it seems to me the best place to be injured, if you're going to be injured, is in the state of New York. And one of the reasons that I found that to be true is because ultimately the general contractor is responsible for everybody that's working with the general contractor. I'm talking specifically about subcontractors, because a lot of times subcontractors, they don't have insurance, or they have very minimal insurance. In cases like these, or when people are severely injured, they need money to live for the rest of their life. Let's talk about the state of New York and that. And from my understanding, there are many forces on the other side that have been trying to change those labor laws forever. How is it that New York still has a very pro-labor law, if you will, for workers?
A lot of questions in there, but let me try to do them. Right off the bat, New York, thank God, does have a tradition and a proud history of protecting people and workers. Construction is a really dangerous business. You've all seen those posters of when they, made the Empire State Building, and you've seen the Depression, those guys, 70, 80, 90 stories with no safety devices at all. And you realize how many people died making these skyscrapers.
And they didn't get paid a dime.
So because of all of that, New York State did pass laws to protect construction workers who have such dangerous jobs. Window washers as well have special laws because they are dangerous jobs. And yes, the insurance companies have been looking to get rid of those protective laws, and they would love to abolish the protective laws. But we in New York, we've been fighting hard to preserve the rights of workers.
So the unions are very strong, and they want this too, don't they?
Of course, because unions want their workers safe, as we all should want our workers safe. I mean, workers are people that are mothers, fathers, husbands, wives. I mean, they're regular people that work really, really hard to make a living, and they should be protected.
So let's talk about if, unfortunately, a worker is injured on the job. First responsibility, get medical help, okay? But then after that, what should an injured worker do? Your message to people out there who are being hurt even today.
Well, first of all, especially when construction workers get hurt, they tend to get hurt pretty badly because you're working at a height, and when you fall from a height, you're going to get really badly hurt. So obviously medical attention is the first thing. The second thing is you really should get legal attention as soon as possible for two reasons. The worker's usual main concern is getting the workers' comp. They want their medical bills paid and something coming in to pay the rent and put food on the table. Even though it's not as much as they earned before, it is something. So you need the lawyer to set up the workers' comp. They have to make sure the accident report is filled out properly for comp purposes as well. And then that then plays a role into who, because obviously in New York you cannot sue your employer who pays workers' comp, but you can sue the owner who owns the property, who's benefiting from it, the general contractor, who, as you noted, under certain sections of the labor law, are required to keep it safe, because that's the job of the GC, the general contractor. They're running the show. They're the quarterback. They've got to keep it safe. They've got to coordinate the trades. They've got to make sure that it's a safe work site.
In many cases that you've handled before, not only have you gotten money, won a verdict or won a settlement, oftentimes you've been able to get punitive damages, correct?
Sometimes. Punitive damages in New York are really tough.
What are punitive damages?
Punitive damages are damages to punish the wrongdoer as opposed to just compensate the injured party. So, for example, when somebody's negligent and they hurt you, normally you want compensation for your injuries. However, if it's really gross, willful, and wanton disregard, they really knew that they were being outrageous, or they should have known that they were being outrageous, then they could be assessed. So, for example, an example of that is there was a crane accident in New York where a man plummeted to his death. A few people actually plummeted to their death, and they knew the crane already had a violation. They knew it was already unsafe, and yet they used it anyhow. And they actually had criminal penalties as well. So that was an intentional act. And they did it just because they didn't want to spend the money to fix it or get a new one or a better one. And two men died because of it. That's an example of punitive damages.
There are a lot of lawyers that advertise, I can handle any kind of case, personal injury cases. But what makes a good construction accident lawyer?
You have to understand how construction works. We study OSHA. We study the labor law. We study rules and regulations. We talk to construction workers. We learn how things are done. We learn the terms that they use. If you're a carpenter, what are the expressions that they use? What are the different stages and steps? So if you don't understand what goes on at a construction site and what roles the different trades play and what OSHA regulations are, you're not going to be able to do this. Also, you have to understand the law, because it's not necessarily what somebody might think the law is, how it gets interpreted, and you're only limited by your own creativity.
Obviously, because of your success, you have many people contact you when they're injured on the job. How do you select the cases that you do? Because obviously you can't take them all.
You can't take them all. So again, I always look for, is there a wrong that needs to be righted? Is there, again, most instances I see, it's a system failure. The contractor maybe gets a bonus if they finish the job earlier by a certain date. So workers rush, 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 and haste makes waste. When you cut corners, you cut safety. And that's what I see happens all the time, is that they want to make more money, profits before people, and therefore they have unsafe conditions, and you want to hold them accountable so that they fix the system so it doesn't happen again. So that's one thing we always look at. And two, was somebody seriously harmed or killed, so that it really warrants our time and attention.
Well, congratulations again for the result of the case, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.